Ganesh.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank ODI for organizing this excellent session on what is a very timely topic, the future of the world trading system. And I'd like to thank Dirk Willem and Sheila and Guy for working with us on this topic. I guess my basic take is that we have a ministerial meeting coming up on about the 15th of December 2001 in Geneva. And the mood of that meeting will be very important to determine where we will go in the future. And my basic thesis is that it's very easy to be very pessimistic amidst all this international uncertainty. And the message, I guess, is that Doha has its problems, but not all may be lost. There remains scope for a scaled-down Doha deal, and also scope for formulating a post-Doha agenda, which provides a major opportunity for the world trading system. Furthermore, emerging Asian regionalism offers a sort of a route to look at a bottom-up way to come at Doha by resolving some of the contentious issues. And the Asian experience also offers some interesting insights on a pragmatic approach to aid for trade, which is another parallel track of the WTO process. And I want to today analyze some of these options. So the first point about Doha is really, we all agree, I'm sure, on this panel that it's very important to conclude Doha. And it is important because Doha can give the world economy a boost of around $155 billion at a lower estimate, but numbers are bigger than that as well. Progress has been slow for at least three sets of reasons. The first is that the key issues at the heart of the topic, agriculture and NAMA, non-market agricultural access, have been contentious, more contentious than we had thought at the beginning. And there are differing interests which have been difficult to get together. Second, people suggest are the number of countries. There are 153 countries that are involved in negotiations, far more than that were there during the time of the Uruguay round, and it's very hard to get a consensus principle-based agreement on a Doha round. A third problem people talk about is the negotiating machinery itself of the WTO. This is a large-scale undertaking. We agree on everything at once, and that's quite tough. And secondly, there is a problem with the formula approach to tariff cuts, and I'm sure Sheila will talk about the Swiss formula and the issues of that type. So we really need political decisions to strike this Doha deal, and of course, the United States and the People's Republic of China are critical to this process. But as many of my panel, I'm sure, share, the prospect of a deep Doha deal seems unlikely. It's receding away, but we should persevere. We shouldn't dunk it. It's very important that that ministerial conference in mid-December focuses on what's at stake, and even a scaled-down Doha deal, whatever that means, is better than no deal at all. It will help foster some kind of faltering recovery. It will bring welfare gains to the poorest countries, particularly in Africa and also bits of Asia, and it will help, most importantly, restore credibility in multilateralism. So that's my first kind of point. The second point is about Plan B. Plan B, looked at from cyberspace or somewhere else, looks a little bit artificial, but it's a necessary part of salvaging the Doha agenda. And Plan B consists of 3 lanes, as Pascal Lamy talks about: a fast lane on LDC-specific issues, duty-free and quota-free access for LDC exports as one of the key planks. A second part is a middle lane on issues that are not so contentious, such as trade facilitation, and those that maintain a development focus, and this slow lane on the really difficult issues, the contentious ones: NAMA, agriculture, trade remedies, intellectual property services, and so on. Now, the reaction to Plan B has been mixed. On the one hand, it does deliver some of the promised development aspect of Doha, the LDC access, and will benefit those countries, certainly. On the other hand, the middle-income countries see little gains because they don't get the deep market access, but yet they're asked to give up something in agriculture and so on, which may be there for the LDCs. The real point about Plan B, I guess, is that at least it carries on the conversation and perhaps the process in some form. Political considerations, the upcoming elections in the United States and in France, along with the change in leadership in the PRC, mean that the 10-year negotiations must be brought to a close this year, or, as Richard Baldwin and others say, it may be 10 years before we can get to another round. So there's a real risk. So the second point is that Plan B, as a step-by-step approach, makes sense, at least to be on the table and offer a forum for negotiation and a procedure. The third point I want to make is that we must initiate this post-Doha agenda early. And that's a very important point. The WTO is the cornerstone of a rules-based multilateral trading system, and it treats large and small countries alike. Dispute settlement is very useful. The global monitoring system that it has is very useful. And likewise, the administration of the agreements under the GATT, that's very useful. But we need to think very strategically of what comes next. And in the what comes next, negotiating smaller sectoral deals in areas like services, environment, goods is one obvious route. And we have the example of the Information Technology Agreement and the Government Procurement Agreement, which show that pursuing these narrow, focused projects, often on a voluntary basis, can work. The second important aspect which needs to be taken into account is the reform of the WTO negotiating machinery itself. Simplifying the formula approach to these tariff cuts is one kind of issue. And then the second one is a little more controversial, modifying this consensus approach towards critical mass decision making. That is some sort of majority type rule, at least on some aspects. Now we need to consider these very carefully, because the latter reform means a subset of membership can at least take some processes forward in the WTO and foster cooperation there. The third very important agenda item for the future is ensuring greater coherence between regional rules and global rules, particularly under free trade agreements. And there are some proposals that were put forward in the World Trade Report that was launched a couple of days in Geneva. The kinds of issues that are coming up are fixing gaps in the WTO legal framework. The transparency mechanism is a temporary measure that could be made a bit more permanent, and there are also gaps in WTO hard law. The soft law aspect of it is very important as well, which is basically best practices in free trade agreements and capacity building. And there's also what some people call multilateralizing regionalism, that is to extend the preferences in a non-descriptive manner to additional parties. And that's, I think, a very important aspect. The fourth point I want to make is that while all this is happening in Geneva, the world has not stood still. Free trade agreements are spreading very rapidly. And in the Asian context, these are seen by negotiators as a means to continue with the trade liberalization agenda. And slow progress in Doha has been one of the main factors leading to a massive rise in free trade agreement activity. Now, Asia plans to deal with the multiple overlapping free trade agreements, the so-called noodle bowl syndrome, by talking about consolidation. And there are two options on the table in Asia. One is a process centered around the ASEAN countries, be it ASEAN +3 or ASEAN +6. The latter includes India in the mix, as well as the big three countries, People's Republic of China, Japan and Korea, as well as the ASEAN 10. And there's a second process, which is the Trans-Pacific Strategic Partnership Agreement, which involves the United States, a number of ASEAN countries, some Latin American countries, Russia, and so on. And essentially, through these two processes, you'll have, in the short term, basically parallel tracks with overlapping membership and coverage of issues. And in the medium term, they may converge, laying the groundwork for an eventual region-wide agreement across Asia. Now, ideally, such an agreement should cover as many countries as possible, as well as many issues as possible. And the focus will obviously be goods, services, and investment. Those tend to be core to some of the Asian agreements and are likely to be part of such a region-wide agreement. But some of these newer issues, such as competition, government procurement, intellectual property, and trade facilitation, are very important. Now, if Asia is able to do this in a very coherent way, that in the future offers a platform for an eventual post-Doha deal or a next round of negotiations in 10 years' time. So the frame we have to keep in mind is very important. The final point I want to really make is about aid for trade. Aid for trade is concessionary development assistance to create the conditions for trade-led growth. And it has become the WTO's second most important mandate after the Doha round. And it's very important that with fiscal constraints that we have to maximize the use of scarce aid for trade in the future. Asia's experience really suggests three things which are interesting in this regard on aid for trade. One is that a regional approach backed by national strategy is better than just simply national strategies on aid for trade. And by that I mean investing in the hard infrastructure, the corridors that open up trade across countries, and combining that with policy reform, trade facilitation, trade finance, and strategies to improve competitiveness. A second very important aspect in the world where we have scarce resources is blending such money. We have grant-based money, which is what aid for trade is about, with the harder money, the loans that come from development banks and others, along with private sector finance and also trade finance. So this blending of resources is very important. We have to think of very innovative financial engineering, so we make the money go further. And the third point is we need much more improved monitoring and evaluation in the world that public demands value for money. That's become very important, and also we have to facilitate a lot of lesson learning. So in conclusion, all is not lost, even though things look very bleak. There's a chance that a rabbit might be pulled out of a hat on 15th of December and thereabouts. If not, at least a framework exists. A post-Doha agenda is very, very important. We must think of that now, and we must put concrete proposals forward. And Asian regionalism offers some route to considering the contentious issues, particularly because we have the world's one of the largest trading nations, the People's Republic of China, that is involved in some of these discussions in Asia. And if those issues are resolved at that level, that can act as a platform for a wider global discussion on a post-Doha agenda. And finally, aid for trade becomes very, very important, but a new approach rather than just a grant-based approach, which is based on handouts. And so I'm going to think much more proactively with business and the private sector. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you very much, Ganesh, for this introduction.